So, 7 years ago, I forged this pattern inside a Damascus steel blade. The piece became known as the chapel. But there's something I never told you. I made enough material for two billets. One became this blade. The other was never twisted. It was never forged into shape. And unless something happened to it during all these years, it should still be somewhere inside my workshop. This is the first video I've made in 7 years. Life changed. My family needed my time, my priorities shifted, and little by little, I stopped going into the workshop. It wasn't a decision I made all at once. I simply stopped forging. My workshop has remained almost untouched ever since. But I never really felt that I was done with it. I always believed that someday something would bring me back. Maybe this is it. The chapel was a custom commission. The repeated symbol was based on the client's cattle brand, the mark used to identify livestock in the ranch. My challenge was to take that simple design and build it into the internal structure of the Damascus steel billet. This is the kind of work I now think of as pattern sculpting. Designing an image inside the steel and controlling how forging, drawing, and twisting transforms it. Before making the billet, I used an old software called Thor to simulate how the pattern would deform when twisted. I tested different arrangements and different degrees of twist before the welding of the final billet. The software is so old that modern Windows could no longer run it normally. A few days ago, I managed to bring it back to life, and the original files were still there. So, this pattern was built in several stages. After preparing the square rods of approximately 10 by 10 millimeters each, I welded the cross mosaic. That was the first weld. Then I built the chapel. For the dark steel, I used 1095, and for the clear one, L6, which is high in nickel content. For the chapel roofs, square rods alone would have made the diagonal lines look too pixelated. So I used small triangular rods between them to create smooth lines. This required much more work, but gave the symbol a much cleaner shape. This gave me the first complete chapel bar. Then I cut the chapel bar in two sections and placed them one over the other, facing each other, with the crosses meeting in the center. Between the two chapels, I used 2 bars of straight layer Damascus with solid steel spacer between them. That separation was mostly practical decision or solution, but it changed the way the pattern opened after twisting. That is what created those flowing shapes beside the chapels, almost like trees. Everything else was filled with 1095 steel to form the background. This paper layout I prepared back then is the one I ultimately used. It placed the chapels in areas where twisting would cause the least deformation. After that, the billet was forge welded, drawn out, twisted, and forged into the final blade. Nothing you see in the blade was engraved onto the surface. The pattern was built inside the steel from the very beginning. Grinding and etching only revealed what was already there. But while watching the original footage again, I noticed something. Look behind the billet I am holding. That is the second one, the sister billet of the chapel. It had already survived the most difficult forged welds, but it was never twisted. It was never forged into a blade. I kept it because I knew that it could become something special someday. Then I stopped forging. The workshop is still there, almost abandoned, covered with dust, waiting. And somewhere inside it, that billet might be exactly where I left it 7 years ago. Would you like to come with me and see if we can find it? And if it's still there, should I finally twist it and forge it?